The Trickster vocation in Dragon's Dogma 2 is a pacifist. Trickster does not deal any damage. Trickster is a non-lethal combatant. In order to play Trickster effectively, you must adopt a completely different mindset. You need to think to yourself at all times, what can I do to be the most insufferable little prick imaginable? Trickster is the best tank in all of Dragon's Dogma 2. They have on-demand aggro draw, whether you want to pull just a single enemy, or get the whole battlefield trying to murder a thing that isn't even real. If you manage your skills properly, you and your pawns will basically never take damage. Why are you looking at my Trickster armor like that? No, it's not weird. The boob window is essential, it helps draw aggro. Your light attack as Trickster is Prevailing Fumes, in which you smack enemies with your sensor to draw aggro. Thankfully, there are plenty of other ways to draw aggro which don't require getting so close to an enemy. Your heavy attack is Ephegeal Snuff, which summons a clone of yourself called a Simulacrum. That's too many syllables, I'm calling it clone from now on. Your clone is the core of Trickster's kit. Everything you do revolves around it. Your clone replaces your aggro. If an enemy is locked onto you, summoning your clone will make them attack it instead. It scales entirely off your own aggro stat. Never enter a battle without it. By holding down your vocation ability, Invoking Essence, you can take your clone for walkies everywhere you go. That way, it'll be ready as soon as you enter battle. Summoning your clone takes a couple seconds, even with the upgrade that reduces the cast time. Because of your high aggro investment, you're going to be the first thing enemies target. But if your clone is ready beforehand, enemies will jump it instead of you. Your clone will instantly die if you get staggered while it's active, so invest in Dwarven Smithing for your armor and get the Sorcerer Augment Constancy for 30% knockdown resistance. Invoking Essence teleports your clone to your location. Your clone has a life bar that scales off your magic stat, so make sure it doesn't die during battle. It's not the end of the world if it does, but taking the time to resummon it can be quite risky. Now, what is the point of drawing aggro as Trickster? To protect your pawns, you idiot. While enemies are mindlessly attacking a thing that doesn't even exist, your sorcerers are in the back readying their nuclear bombs, and your thief is already extracting the entrails of everything nearby. Meanwhile, all the monsters aren't even aware this is going on. They are too focused on your clone to react to what your pawns are doing. Frequently changing your clone's position is essential, because keeping it in one spot for too long will get it killed faster. Getting an enemy to chase after your clone means they're spending more time moving around and less time attacking. But what happens if you don't have aggro? Maybe you lost it at some point, or the enemy's focused on your pawn first. It just happens sometimes, and it also doesn't matter, because you can just use the skill Suffocating Shroud to aggro every enemy in the nearby area. Now, you can hold down your basic attack and launch a smoke cloud that gets the attention of one enemy, but the charge time is pretty long. Suffocating Shroud has a faster deployment time and hits everything in the area at the cost of a bit of stamina. You can use it at the start of the fight to immediately get everything attacking your clone, or to quickly get attention again if the monster starts going for your pawns. Your strength stat increases your aggro, but it does get to a point where you don't need to invest in any more strength. If you feel like your aggro is good enough as is, Elven Smith your sensor for more magic, which increases the clone's HP. Binding Effigy is one of the most badass skills Trickster gets access to. You can fling your clone at an enemy and latch it onto them. Okay, what's the point of doing that? It makes everything else attack the enemy with the clone attached to it, you idiot. Trickster can quite easily solo an entire group of enemies by latching the clone onto them and watching as they slowly tear each other to pieces. Liches are very weak to binding, because the skeletons will try to attack their summoner, shutting down one of their mechanics completely. Just make sure binding doesn't miss, because if it does, your clone disappears. Then you have to go through the resummon of shame to get it back. The other downside to Binding Effigy is the enemy with the clone latched to them will aggro onto your real body, but there are a couple ways to defend yourself. Casting Tricky Terrace on a flat surface will cause small enemies to trip over, letting you make distance, grapple, or throw them. You can also use Terrace on a cliff or between a gap to trick enemies into falling through it. You can lure them over using Visitant Aura to hover over the gap and teleport your clone to it. However, terrain kills are situational and not Trickster's true strength. That lies in aggro, crowd control, and buffing your pawns. Elusive Divider conjures a wall that the AI will view as an obstruction. I like putting up a wall in front of my sorcerers so they can cast without fear. Fragrant Alarum is, it's a skill. It lets you detect enemies through walls. Look, they're not all gonna be bangers, okay guys? I mean, every vocation has that skill that makes you go, yeah, that seems interesting. Aromatic Resurgence is the opposite of Fragrant Alarum. Useful. While active, it boosts the damage of all your pawns in the area, slowly drains their health to balance it out a bit, but lets the pawns fight even if their health reaches 0. I honestly forgot about that last effect because pawns never die when you play Trickster. The damage boost is absurd. Seneschal bless whoever let Trickster cook this hard. No, Ulrika, I don't sell drugs. They're called performance enhancers. Finally, you've got the Meister skill, Dragon's Delusion, which is one of the sickest looking things in the game. This skill makes everything in the vicinity shit themselves. It instills fear on smaller targets, making them run away and trip over. This means you can stop an entire group of enemies from attacking completely. Larger targets don't get feared, but the knockdown damage this thing deals is absurd. You can walk up behind a griffin, do a FNAF jump scare, and it will just fall on its ass. Dragon's Delusion has 2 downsides to prevent it from being too stupidly broken. First off, the stamina cost is very high. Second, the charge time is very long. If you're worried about being interrupted, that isn't a problem, because your clone is already drawing attention, letting you sit there and charge it in peace. The long charge time means that it can be harder to interrupt a monster's attack unless you have the foresight to predict it or time the cast perfectly. I should clarify that this skill will just knock over enemies, so you can rush in, get a KD or stagger right away, but using it as an interrupt takes a bit of getting used to. And yes, if you have the stamina, you can just cast Delusion over and over and over again, and stunlock a majority of large bosses in the game. Dragon's Delusion does work on drakes, but it will only interrupt, not trigger a knockdown. You can use Delusion to interrupt a drake's spells, but this requires incredibly precise timing because of how long the wind-up animation is. But if your reaction time is on the ball, you can interrupt their casting right before they release the spell. Let's quickly go over augments. As Trickster, you want constancy for that sexy knockdown resistance. Provocation from Fighter is another essential augment, doubling your passive aggro pulling abilities. Remember that your clone scales off your aggro. You shouldn't reduce your aggro with something like Subtlety in hopes that the enemies are more likely to attack your clone. If your clone is active, enemies will attack it and not you. So stack aggro until you feel like you don't need any more. Metal and Apotropasm are great for buffing your defenses. Then for the last 2, you can go with Thew and Dynamism. Keeping your carry weight on the lower side lets you move around faster, which is essential for Trickster. I like using 1 Ring of Disfavor for aggro pulling and a Ring of Resolution for knockdown resistance. Paired with Dwarven Smithing and Constancy, your Trickster will eat up a surprising number of attacks without flinching. Trickster's class identity rides on manipulating enemies and buffing your pawns. That doesn't mean that once you go through your support rotation, it's time to sit on your ass, wait for your pawns to clean up, then go onto Reddit and complain that Trickster is an inactive vocation. Once you've got downtime, you need to observe the battlefield and think, is there something or someone I can throw? Can I pin down an enemy for my melee pawns to kill? Should I use a spell tome? Does my clone need healing? Don't forget that you can still take off your sensor and curb stomp enemies that are downed. You should always be doing something as Trickster. My personal skill loadout when playing Trickster consists of Suffocating Shroud, Binding Effigy, Aromatic Resurgence, and Dragon's Delusion. Trickster is a vocation that encourages creativity and experimentation, so play around and see which skills you personally prefer using. However, if you're having trouble figuring out how to play it, I'll go over my general playstyle and you might be able to get an idea of how you'd like to play Trickster yourself. Your clone should be active at all times, so after entering combat, use Shroud to get everything locked onto it. If there are multiple enemies, I pick someone in the middle of the pack and latch my clone onto it using Binding Effigy. Once your clone is latched, the enemies will be too busy murking that one guy to attack your pawns. And when they die, your clone will start hovering over the body of the enemy, still drawing aggro. You then have the choice of letting it stay there or latching it onto a different enemy. If all of that is too much work, run into a fight, clone at the ready, and just unleash a Dragon's Delusion, making all enemies run pissing themselves, which your pawns can easily rush down. You can end the fight before a single monster raises their weapon. For large monsters, you're gonna have to think a little bit harder. Enemies that enrage like golems and ogres can be really hard to aggro manage. I prefer pushing golems over at the earliest convenience, so the sorcerers can vacuum it up with Maelstrom. With ogres, using Dragon's Delusion for a quick stagger, followed by Aromatic Resurgence, gives your party ample time to wail on it. Since aggro management on ogres is so finicky, using Dragon to stun it in place is the next best thing. It's best to use Aromatic Resurgence once your pawns have either readied a big attack or an enemy has been downed. I can already see all the comments saying, why would I go through all this effort when I could just play Thief and kill everything by myself? First off, it's a video game, play however you want. Secondly, Trickster turns combat encounters into a puzzle. unless you're running sorcerers in your party, but I'll get to that later. My preferred way to play Trickster is with a single thief pawn because it lets you really push the limits of your kit. Your aggro management must be perfect, and it gives you plenty of opportunities to abuse friendly fire against enemies. Trickster works in a variety of team compositions, but certain pawns synergize perfectly with its kit. Your job is aggro management, which lets sorcerers cast massive spells very safely. You rush in with your clone, hold aggro, and your sorcs let loose a one-shot spell of their choice. 3 sorcerers is an option, but I prefer bringing a thief along. Sorcerers attack very slowly, while thieves are the opposite. Your thief will be on the front lines, dispatching small foes incredibly easily, and finishing off whatever your sorcerers couldn't clean up themselves. And having more than one sorc lets them auxiliary cast off each other. Sorcerer pawns are incredibly overpowered thanks to spells like Maelstrom, Not Bowl-Eyed, etc. And Trickster's support kit allows sorcerers to cast without fear. With this team comp, all encounters took 60 seconds or less to complete. I actually started getting really bored just going hold aggro, knock down, apply damage buff, let sorcs nuke everything. The way Trickster brings out sorcerer's strengths is satisfying from a mechanical standpoint, but good god does it make things way too easy. That's why I just run a duo instead. Make sure that any pawns you hire don't have provocation or a ring of disfavor equipped. Warrior, fighter, and Trickster have overlapping aggro roles, which means that they don't work as well together. The last thing you want is a pawn stealing your aggro. Remember that you are a tank and there needs to be only one of you. That being said, a warrior and fighter without aggro buffs works fine with Trickster, but you're better off using a thief for their higher damage at that point. Thanks to Dragon's Delusion, Trickster doesn't need much help with knockdown. Archer is another good option if you don't want to run a thief. Mage works okay, but the point of a Trickster is for your party to leave battles unscathed. It's up to you if multi-sorc nukes are more valuable than Mage's other buffs. Make sure to play around and see what team comp you're most comfortable with. Okay, I think that covers just about everything. Oh, but remember to not do drugs, unless you're making your enemy do them against their will. Special thanks to my patrons for their continued support as always. I'd like to imagine that this video will help reduce Trickster slander I see online, but I fully expect it to change nothing. It matters not, play the Vape Master if you want to, or don't.